Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from, here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Hey, I've got a very interesting question for you. What if the left was actually successful at eliminating religion? Now, think about that. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. First, I would like to make a little plug here. And that's, if you like sci-fi that actually examines maybe what the left really thinks when it comes to religion and, why maybe the elite have a different perspective for what religion should be than they think the common people should have, then check out my novel, The Destiny of Our Past. And you can look that up on Amazon. Also, check the comment section, and you can go to my official website. But enough of the plugging, kind of the Edward Bernays thing here. I'd like to deal with that whole issue of what if the left got rid of religion. I think, if we think about John Lennon's old classic song, Imagine, and it kind of, essentially the one thing you pick up from that is this kind of leftist, maybe not necessarily all left, because there are people who are conservative that would like to see an end to religion. But essentially, let's just say that it had that kind of idea of imagine there's no religion and everyone just got along together and that sort of thing. And it's kind of an idealistic way of seeing the world. And maybe, I think, a dreamy way of seeing the world. Because I don't think that's actually, I don't think that would actually result from eliminating religion. Not in the least. And I'd like to just kind of go through what would happen. What would happen if all of a sudden tomorrow you woke up and you found out that everyone had renounced religion and, it was going to be churches and synagogues and mosques and whatever, all closed and there was, just for some reason everyone just stopped believing. I don't necessarily think that would be good. Now, I'm going to go through a whole bunch of reasons why that is, but first of all, the human spirit. I think the human spirit does strive for meaning in life. Okay? I don't know how much an animal perceives the world in regards to its place in the world. Not sure a rat would contemplate what its meaning of existence is. I don't think any creature on Earth has that ability except for humans. And unfortunately, a lot of humans even forego thinking about that. Or at least they try to repress it. I think everyone ultimately does think about it, but some people are better at repressing it than others. And so I think the human spirit needs to have also a sense of uniqueness. Now, if we believe that we are all just a product of evolution, then that means we're kind of taking maybe an extreme B.F. Skinner sort of way of looking at it, like we are just the sum of our learning and synapses and brain activity. And once that stops, we stop completely. That which is you, which you perceive right now, thinking about who you are, what you've contributed, what you will contribute, your dreams, hopes, aspirations. If you look at it that way, then you cease to exist when you die. And your pile of matter is of no more importance than a dead dog, a dead rat, for that matter, a dead tree. And, your little time period here, it all ends then. And that kind of gets us into kind of this, what would lead to nihilism. But I'll come back to that. Now, what would you do in reference to keeping society unified? Now, some people think, but look at the least religious countries. Look at countries like Oh, for instance, the Scandinavian countries, don't they do just fine? Well, first of all, I would argue as to whether they're truly atheistic. Many people in Scandinavia are either very nominally Christian or they are they have kind of agnosticism that acknowledge something is out there. I mean, there's a lot of popularity in Scandinavia with things like, paranormal type of exploration and so forth. I think ultimately, though, it would, if you had the whole world being this way, you would have to have something to distract people. Now, Edward Bernays gave us the idea that humans are irrational and that they have to be in some way controlled by consumerism. He's not the one who came up with the irrationality. He came up with the part about controlled by consumerism. And so, in a sense, the idea that you could get people to maybe replace God with some sort of competition, careerism, trying to make more money than the other person, just making life into like one big, long marathon. When you're on a marathon, you're just trying to beat the other people, and you're feeling pretty good as you pull ahead of others, and so forth. And, consumerism as a religion, a replacement of religion, seems to be the same thing. Keep people occupied with all the new gadgets and all the new status and so forth. And then if they just want to have some free time to engage in something beyond, then they can exercise their imagination through watching TV or going to movies or music or gaming or whatever. Okay, that would be one area that you could divert the human spirit. And another one could be nationalism. I think ultimately, if you study Nazi Germany, and there are people who say, oh, but it was religious. Oh, no, it wasn't religious, or blah, 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 whatever. But ultimately, if you get right down to it, it was sort of like a Darwinism mixed with paganism and a few pieces here and there of the Christian traditions. Not much, just kind of on the outside. And could the society have lasted if, for instance, there would not have been the war, or they would have come up with the atomic bomb first and won the war? I actually don't think so. I don't think so. I think the idea of striving for some sort of what you could call a false ego projection. What I mean false is that you're part of a living organism as a society because you are, for instance, German, or take it to today, for instance, because you are American. Being an American is something, yes, you do share certain values and heritage and hopefully some core beliefs of, freedom and so forth from, with everyone else. But ultimately, you are an individual. And other people, they're not connected to you like family. Okay? Family, they care about you. They care what happens to you. People on the street, they don't. Sorry, they don't. And, all of you could be replaced at work, within what? One day? Maybe a week? If you have a really important position? Anyone can be replaced. So get past that idea that, you're just totally special because, you're you and you're the best at your profession, because they could probably find someone just as good. If they're not as good, they can become as good in time. How many of you could, you can't remember the names of most of your teachers. And we usually think of teachers as being this, idealized, giving sort of individual who's there to impart knowledge and help guide you through life, at the very beginning so that you'll have the skills necessary later. But they can be the most absolutely dedicated people in the world, and most of us still don't remember most of our teachers' names through grade 1 through 12. Okay? And you probably don't remember hardly any of your professors that you had in university, if you went to university. So, you've got that whole thing, well, I'll just throw that out there. You've got the nationalism. Well, it would only go so far. You've got careerism, which, again, is connected to consumerism, but it doesn't answer the questions. So essentially, I think you actually come up with nihilism. And, whether you pronounce that nihilism, I've had professors that pronounce it nihilism, some that pronounce it nihilism. Doesn't matter. The thing is that ultimately it becomes kind of the ethic if you get rid of any sense of religion in the society, because you cease to have that sort of, I'm special, I was created with a purpose. Okay, something metaphysical. And, if you think about it this way, all that knowledge and skills, if you think that way, all that fantastic knowledge and skills that Stephen Hawking had, well, that was gone within 5 minutes of when he stopped breathing. Okay, gone. And you might think, yeah, but the contributions are still out there in society. But in 100 years from now, no one's going to know who he was. All right? Unless they're maybe studying some sort of history or something of physics during this time period. So, no. That doesn't hold meaning. Now, we could see where that could kind of leave a person a little bit psychologically maybe like, whoa, that kind of sucks and so forth. But how would that manifest itself in regards to society in general? Well, I've seen surveys that have shown that the more religious a person is, the more children they tend to have. And that is cross-cultural. And I think there might be some exceptions, like with China, where everyone has kind of there's somewhat of a limit on how many kids you can have. But overall, if you live in a Muslim country, 100% Muslim, the most devout have the most kids. Now, some people say, well, yeah, but that could be socioeconomic. Yeah, it can be socioeconomic, but what came first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, if you're a very devout Muslim and you've got 12 kids, maybe you're not going to be able to afford to live in the nicest neighborhood, even though your job may be very similar to a person who does live in the nicest neighborhood. So to say that, oh yeah, well, it's just the people that have any skills or anything, that have big families and they're, and so forth. No. There are other factors involved. Although you could say the more learning a person has, the longer they stay out of the reproductive phase of their life, by and large, especially if they're women, and then therefore they don't have as many kids as someone who maybe didn't go for education. But beyond that variable, I would say that still, religion plays a huge factor. If you look at Israel, it's the ultra-Orthodox that tend to have the big families, whereas the more Reformed Jews have small families with conservatives somewhere in between. And in America, you'll see the most, even within religions that strive to push the idea that you should have a large family, like let's say Catholics or Mormons, you'll generally find it's the most devout of the Catholics and most devout of the Mormons who tend to have the largest family. So I think that when you look at then secular, someone who's atheist, they tend to have very small families. If you looked at the Soviet Union, now there were other variables such as the size of apartments and stuff like that if you lived in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but it tended to be that women for decades after the Second World War. I mean, there's this huge baby boom that took place after the war, but then it went down to where the average Russian woman even though there was all kinds of incentives to have kids, the average Russian woman had barely over one kid per woman up until present day. I know Putin's trying to change that. I don't know how successful he'll be, but the thing is that, within a very secularized society, as the Soviet Union was, the birth rates didn't, the places that still had the highest birth rates were areas where religion was still a powerful force, such as the Muslim republics of that time, the Kazakhstan and Tajikistan and so forth. So religion plays a huge factor in that. I would speculate that without religion, now some people may like this idea. If you're like a big fan of, that Georgia Guidestones, which I don't know that much about. I don't even know who put it up. But it has that goal of, the world should have 500 million people, no more. And the thing is, I guess if you support that, then fine, you wouldn't mind this. But I think if you got rid of religion, I think your birth rate would plummet everywhere in the world. I really do. I think it would just go down. Because having children is a sacrifice. And so if you feel that God put you here for a purpose and you're helping to extend this wonderful calling, then you're going to welcome the idea of sacrifice. But on the other hand, if you're just like, if you're a woman, I have to devote 9 months here, and then I've got this child I'm going to have to raise, it's going to be, you may feel like, well, maybe I'll have one, so I'll feel fulfilled as a mother. So I can be all around experience what it is to be a woman. And the same would be true for men, although I'm not as sure as many men feel that way as women do in my personal experiences. So I think the birth rates would plummet if you got rid of religion for obvious reasons. Now, would the crime rate go up? I don't necessarily think so. I think a lot has to do with the culture and the cultural expectations. Although if by getting rid of religion that also could tear away traditions, I think you would have some problems there. You might actually see more crime. The other thing, though, related, and that's on a personal level, but at the government level, if there's no religion, then I'm wondering if we might see more wars and more persecution of people. Now, if you only have I go to Facebook and I read memes that people post, idea of history of the world and geopolitical concerns, then you might be taken in by that idea that, almost all wars have been a factor of religion. Untrue. In fact, many of the wars that had something to do with religion, at least on the outer, surface of it, were ultimately economic. Okay, many of the people, who took part, whether they be, maybe Muslims when they were trying to take over Europe, or the Crusaders when they were trying to push into the Middle East, plunder was always something that could come in as a fringe benefit. So yes, you may have told your true believers, yes, we're doing this and in the name of, and then also that your sins will be forgiven you if you die in battle. That could be kind of a psychological motivation, but ultimately the big push was, getting resources. The Vikings before that, they didn't go and go all over Europe in order to spread the religion of Odin. They instead went into various parts of Europe in order to either get land or to set up trading posts or so forth. So it was resources. All right. It wasn't just brute force. Let's go beat up some people, because you can't organize people on that flimsy of motivation beyond maybe 5 or 6 people. No, if you want to have what would be considered a raiding party, then you needed to have more of a sense of this is something to increase the wealth, especially amongst young men who might not be connected into the society economically or when it came to family. I mean, maybe you'll find yourself a wife if you go raid Britain or Ireland or whatever. So ultimately, if we look at let's keep going. All the wars of the 19th century that absolutely devastated Europe. I mean, if you think about where Europe could have extended itself if all the men who died in battles from Napoleon all the way through the 19th century, the 1800s, if they would have just, either built up the infrastructure within Europe or fanned out into other areas of the world, as many Spaniards and Italians did when they went into Argentina and Uruguay and southern Brazil, or, Irish and Germans who went to America. This would have extended the infrastructure and reach of Europe. If you look at World War I and II, none of those wars had anything to do with religion. So now we're talking about 200 years. Religion had nothing to do with it. The Vietnam War, nothing to do with religion. The Korean War, nothing to do with religion, unless you want to consider communism as a pseudo-religion, philosophical religion. But, and again, when I said the thing about Nazism, you can't consider it a religion, and it certainly wasn't trying to extend the reach of Christianity. All right? I mean, most of the people it conquered and crushed in war were either Jews or Christians. So I don't think they were trying to spread the Bible or anything like that. At least I've never heard of any armies going somewhere and taking a copy of the Bible with them to, help convert people to Lutheranism or Catholicism. Now, that takes us into the modern day, and people are thinking, what about Syria? Well, Syria comes close. But then again, why is America in there? Why is Russia in there? Why are other countries, Saudi Arabia, in there? Saudi Arabia, it may be a religious basis, but America and Russia, it's more economic. Actually, Saudi Arabia and Qatar and all these countries, you could throw in economics as well, which connects to religion, but it's not, perhaps the primary thing that gets people to part with their resources to help organizations there. So I don't think getting rid of religion would bring peace to the world. In fact, people would still break apart according to ethnicity. They would still break apart according to, I am in this part of the world and I have this standard of living, and you're in that part of the world, you have that standard of living. And if you try equalizing that out through some sort of worldwide socialistic type of government, that would work very well. You could have rebellion. So ultimately, getting rid of religion would not bring peace. And would it make people more intelligent? I actually think opposite. And you're probably wondering, what? Why is that? Doesn't religion hold people back? No. I think having a I think one of the things that's actually caused a lot of highly religious people in America and maybe even Europe to veer away and have kind of a negative feeling towards, for instance, science, is because there's such an emphasis on, no, you can't be religious. You got to believe that we're here because of evolution. I knew kids when I was in school that they didn't like science that much. They thought I was atheist because I like science so much. And I'm like, no, I really like science. But there is this kind of sense that if you had to either be religious or you had to either be into science. And I think the opposite is actually true, but, there are people that feel that way. And I always found the more I knew about how things operated and the complexity of life, be it biological or even physical, that just, was like more of a confirmation of religion to me. But anyway, I think that maybe if you have a sense of nihilism in the world, if you got rid of religion, maybe the only thing that would really promote the idea of people wanting to know a lot about science would be the idea of making money off of it. So maybe in a sense, pure science, the idea of just studying it to be good at it and maybe make some discoveries that'll just be interesting, might lose some of its interest. I mean, this is debatable. It depends on the person. I'm sure we could spend hours, debating something if we had a group of people together. But I think that a lot of people would actually lose that sense of wonder and awe of the universe. We got to remember John Locke and Newton and all these kinds of people that were very important in formulating what we now know as the scientific method and a lot of theories when it comes to how the universe operates. They were trying to find out how God did it. They weren't just like, well, let's push God out of it. Although later people came along and kind of used it for that purpose. Now, other factors, I think you could actually have more authoritarianism because people might, religion has in one sense, controls people. And that is that a lot of people that might normally want to do something bad or contemplate doing something bad suddenly veer away from doing something bad because they feel that God will punish them in not only this life, but maybe the life to come. And so they decide not to do it. Now, I think in many respects this may deal more with socio-moral type of things. Should you have sex with someone when you're not married to them? If they do get pregnant, or you get pregnant, should you have an abortion? I think these are more the socio-moral factors that come in regards to religion. Should you go out and get drunk? Should you do this? Should you do that? But when it comes to crimes, I think that still has a sense of, most of us probably would not go rob a bank whether we were atheist or not. And why wouldn't we do that? Two reasons. One is the fear of getting caught and thrown in jail for 20 years. Or B, you get killed in the process of trying to do something major like that. So it would be kind of a sense of, everyone thinks of what it would be like to commit a crime, but the fear of failure and the fear of punishment come in and stop you from taking it to maybe a logical next step. Now, of course, when there's riots and looting and stuff like that, many people who normally are good, they see a sense of, oh, well, everyone else is doing it. So it gives them somewhat of a permission to do something wrong, or it gives them a sense that I won't get caught. Now, imagine if the factor that you knew you could get away with something, but you don't do it because you're afraid that God would punish you, and I'm sure everyone has experienced that. What if it didn't exist? Well, I think people would most likely, like I said before, the socio-moral thing, they'd be more likely to do things that are considered more sinful than criminal. But then there would be others who would take it to the criminal realm and not feel bad, especially if you feel like, oh my gosh, I've got this many years to live, and here's the kind of job I'll have, and I'll just have this little home and this little car and this little wife and this little husband or this little this or this or this. Whereas that kind of sense of, if I could do something big, I might be able to get lots of money from it. Well, that might come in. Or just the thrill seeker people might be more likely to take those thrills a little bit further. I mean, I've said in shows in the past, many people who are psychopathic don't do something wrong because they believe in God. And therefore, they feel that if they do something wrong, God will punish them in the end. So, it keeps them good. Although they may not feel guilt or shame or, empathy in those same ways that regular people do, they still don't want to, if they belong to a religion that believes in hell, burn forever. So they avoid doing those things. They may even do really good things for people in the sense of helping people so that, it gives them a better position in the afterlife. But nevertheless, the belief in religion maybe keeps them from doing stuff that they normally would do if given the opportunity. So, also, what kind of feeling of connectiveness would we have if we didn't have religion? Religion gives us a sense of belonging that takes us out of just being a family, but gives us a sense of being part of something bigger. Nationalism, I don't think cuts it in the long run. And, I said before, consumerism and so forth. So I don't think you'd have that same sense of belonging. So we'd have a lot more lonely people, more nihilistic people. So ultimately, I can go on and on and on, but ultimately, those people that try to promote the idea of a utopianism that would see no religion, I think are only seeing things one-dimensionally. And I think often what they do, and this would be more likely to fit those people that consider themselves secular humanists, is they feel that you can have all of the good of religion, all of the benefits of religion without being religious. And I think that's what we see in many European areas that are highly secular, is that it was only a generation ago that they were highly religious. And so, at least by comparison to what they are today. And so those societal norms are still in effect, but given another generation or two, I'm not sure that would be the case. I think you would see some of these other things I've talked about. Once, grandma and grandpa die, and then mom and dad die, and your kids and then your grandkids who've had no connection to religion, are just kind of on their own in life. So ultimately, I think that religion is a very good and very positive force in society, and that it's naive to think that you can get rid of religion and still keep the society as it remains, or even think that it's going to get better without that sense of belonging on the more positive end, the sense of knowing you're special and your place in the universe on the positive end, or maybe even the negative end. Just the idea of, people staying good because they don't want to take the consequences of doing something wrong. So ultimately, forget it. If you think that, we'll be a freer and healthier and happier society without religion, I think that's extremely naive. And it is not going to be the case. I was jogging the other day, and I went into this one area that it's an area that seems to be in, maybe at one time could have been developed. Maybe there may have been homes there, 100 years ago. And there was a lot of fruit trees that were in bloom. Now, these are trees that may have been planted there originally, or they could have just, when the area was cleared, there were seeds deposited. You know how, birds, they fly around, they eat, fruit, and then they swallow the seeds. And many of these seeds don't digest, and they just come out the other end when the bird's flying over. The same is true for foxes, rodents, and so forth. And this spreads seeds around. And so there's a lot of apple trees, cherry trees, and so forth in this area. Now, this gave me a certain epiphany, so to speak. And that is this. You need to have a variety of fruit, vegetables, and so forth in a society. You take a look back at Ireland, and they had a potato blight that killed a lot of the potatoes. Now, the English didn't help, since what potatoes did grow and other foods they shipped out of Ireland to feed their troops and so forth that were spread around the empire at that time. So millions of Irish people starved to death during that time period. Now, that showed that if your reliance is on one particular product and it dies out, or it, for some reason, doesn't produce that season, or for several seasons, then that's actually quite dangerous. And we're starting to get to that point now. That's right. We are getting to that point now. And there's a reason for that. The thing that agribusiness looks at, and yes, farming used to be something that you had small farmers, hobby farmers, medium-sized farmers, and big farmers. But agribusiness has come in the last couple of decades, and they have bought up vast tracts of land and produce, they've gone into the idea of a single crop, or in the sense of factory farms when it comes to animals, a single animal. But I'm going to deal with crops right now. And they'll grow what seems to be like the biggest apples or the largest cherries, that sort of thing. And many of these are engineered. They are genetically modified. And the problem is that those that produce the most per acre wind up being the ones that dominate everywhere. All right. Now, it used to be that there were, if you go back to colonial times, I'm going to come back to this in just a moment here in reference to the colonial times. I heard somewhere where there's 200 different varieties of apples that you could buy at markets. Now, you might not be able to buy those at a market, let's say in Virginia, if the apples were being grown in Massachusetts. Okay, so there was this variety that existed, and there'd be certain differences in taste, texture, and so forth. And, like I said, coming back to this, Thomas Jefferson, when he was president, commissioned that people go out all over the world and bring back seeds from all kinds of crops, fruit trees, wheat, barley, so forth. And the idea was that you wanted to have a very successful and diversified farming industry. And so in those days, you may have had, for instance, natural apple might have been smaller. It might have been tastier, but Nowadays that's not what sells. Little tiny apples or something like that. And so what's happened as you've had the concentration of farming into conglomerates and corporations and so forth, the number of farmers has been sliced to a fraction of what it was in, let's say, 1990. And therefore, you get this idea of, we will plant a kind of uniform species of highly profitable food. Now, here's where the problem comes in. First of all, you're going to have a vulnerability when it comes to your crops when you do this. The vulnerability will be that what if a disease comes along? Okay, what if some disease comes along and wipes out this particular strain of apple or cherry or pear or peach or plum or whatever? Okay, what happens? Well, you might have a situation where now you're going to have vast shortages. All right? You need to have more of this diversity in order to protect from the idea of concentrating just on one particular variety of fruit. The second problem you have is that if these are genetically modified, what then enables, what is actually the health consequences of that? Now, I'm not going to go into this in much detail here. That's a whole different show. But we're really not certain what the health consequences are. But even beyond that, are these trees that if you plant them will grow and produce trees that will be identical? I've heard there are many seeds that if you plant them, they won't. So farmers have to buy them from the manufacturer when they want to grow next year's crops or next generation's trees. And that is I would say that is probably a major vulnerability right there. And so the other problem in this is that another thing is that you're concentrating the production of seeds in several large agribusinesses, and these are transnational corporations. They are producing and own the patent to certain varieties of seeds. My understanding is you produce an apple tree that you've made changes in its DNA. You can take a patent on that, and then if later, even if you do grow that apple tree, you're in violation of a copyright because you're growing it without permission. You have not bought that tree, even though you may have grown it yourself. And again, that puts a lot of power within corporations when they could say, well, we own your food. And you say, well, I'll just grow it. And then they can say, well, we own that even if you grow it. You're in violation of copyright. In the same way as, I'll produce music. Well, you've just taken a song and you just had a band or orchestra or whatever play the song. Well, if it's a copyrighted song, it doesn't matter who played it. It's still a violation of copyright. So that occurs when it comes to seeds and stuff as well. So what is one solution that sounds kind of hippie-ish maybe, but what is a solution to this? Well, think about this. If you've got trees growing on your property that, let's say you have an apple tree or cherry tree or plum tree, some sort of fruit tree that has been that is, let's say, 20 years old, 25 years old, 30 years old. In all likelihood, it is not patented in any way. In all likelihood, this comes from pure seed. I might note, I've noted this on other shows, that the Bible translation of pure, when it deals with Noah, deals with a purity of genetics, essentially. And, may shed light on what was going on back in his day than we care to think about, or at least what, controlled churches today teach. But anyway, the idea that you've got maybe trees growing, or maybe there's trees in your neighborhood or just out in the woods that you might go to and harvest fruit that are maybe a variety that's not sold in the stores anymore, or is not patented by someone, gives a certain amount of freedom that people should exercise. And just like Thomas Jefferson, when he sent people out to gather seeds from around the world, well, then they were planted, obviously. Maybe this is something that people should strive to do. If, it sounds weird in a sense. It sounds very hippie-ish, but again, it makes sense. And that is, take the seeds that, let's say you have a cherry tree. And, you take the seeds out in order to make pie, or, you just go out there and pick some cherries and eat them. Well, it leaves the seeds. Save those seeds. Find areas that, just like the parable of Jesus when he, he used throwing the seeds out, and some of them land on good soil, some on bad, some on rocks, and, some will grow, some won't, in reference to making converts to Christianity. The thing is that if you just scatter those seeds in areas that are vacant, areas where maybe there's it's just land that's just not used. Could be, areas that maybe a forest fire or whatever. Just vacant areas. Maybe that is an area that you could just throw these seeds and see if they'll grow. You might throw out 100 seeds, let's say. Maybe one of them will actually produce a tree. But this will help preserve the genetic diversity of, and maybe even, maybe prevent variety from going extinct. Because I'll bet you anything that many people have trees growing on their property, or they have access to, that grow varieties of fruit that may no longer really exist out there in the world today. Maybe those could be some of the surviving trees. Or maybe it's a fraction of what's left of that variety of tree. Why not preserve it? Do we really want a world in which there's 4 or 5 different types of apples and they're all genetically modified? Do we really want a world that, plums are the same way and so forth? Do we really want that? If we don't, then we should strive to try to diversify. Also means on our own property. Maybe we should get past this idea that, good suburban lifestyle, if you've got land, if you've got a yard, has to be one of a flat yard that you just mow all the time. Plant some trees there. And if you can, get trees that are not modified. And you can still go to people that sell trees, the plant shops and so forth, especially in more rural areas, you can get trees that are not GMO. And, maybe plant more trees on our land. If you think about it, what would happen if you had one of those situations where society falls apart? Okay? And what about all of those varieties of apples and cherries and so forth that people grow on these agri-farms? What if those agri-farms aren't able to be maintained in the event of some sort of collapse? A lot of these agri-farms are located in areas like California where if you don't water them continuously through irrigation that comes ultimately from the mountains, if suddenly society collapsed, all of that land will revert back to desert in no time. All those trees will die. I've seen some areas, I saw a documentary one time where they were showing some of the areas that used to have communities in the foothills around Los Angeles. And when the water got diverted away from those areas, then those communities died out. And, there was yards that had trees, but the trees were dead. There was no water. So those vast areas where we are concentrating our food production, if the infrastructure fell apart, which could happen through a pandemic, diseases, you can't predict a disease coming along, similar to the Spanish flu epidemic, which would destroy our infrastructure. You could have some sort of activity of the sun, which could knock out our electrical grid. These are not even war scenarios. War, of course, could do a lot of damage, but I'm just talking about things that could happen regardless of war. And if the infrastructure collapses, that means it's not like in the Great Depression, where there were still vast areas of land that were used for farming and you could still get really low cost produce. Many of those areas now have housing developments on them. Many of those areas now are just gone, or they've been converted to agribusiness, but they don't grow things. I remember where I grew up, there used to be walnut groves everywhere. Okay? As a teenager, I don't like walnuts personally, but, my family did. And I would go out on my bike and just gather up, and no one cared, just gather up bags of walnuts and bring home. And those walnut trees and groves and stuff like that, which were for the most part abandoned, they're gone now. They've been cut down and there's housing developments there now. So imagine if you had a breakdown of infrastructure. Those won't exist. What maybe people could have eaten. I don't know how old those trees were. Maybe they were from the Depression era. Maybe people did eat those, walnuts when there wasn't much to eat back in those days. But they're gone. And the same with, there was peach groves that, my parents would go to, and you could pay a little bit of money and you go in and get really low cost peaches, of which my mom would, can those away, during for the winter. And those are gone. They're gone. There's housing developments there. And so we've concentrated a great deal of our agricultural, we could call infrastructure, in areas that do not sustain life of those kinds of trees unless you artificially bring in irrigation. And an infrastructure collapse would mean that would end. So goodbye, vast areas of the, valleys that exist in California where, that's where we get a lot of our food. So it's a good idea to have variety out there to where we can access it and then be able to survive in the event of a catastrophe. So we're not even just talking about the survival of varieties of fruit and, ultimately other types of crops as well. But we're talking about the survival of human beings. Okay? But too much emphasis on what sells at the store, even, and then suddenly the infrastructure collapses. Well, those kinds of varieties don't exist anymore. And you won't have stores if the infrastructure collapses anyway, either. So, try this. And maybe even if you have seedlings that are growing on your land, just don't mow them down. Teach the kids something, or the grandkids. Dig them up, dig them up when they're small, and then take the kids out and show them how to plant food. These are skills that people had during the Depression. Okay? I remember my dad told me that, he came from a family of 8 kids, and his parents had chickens, for instance, and they would send the kids out to gather bugs to feed the chickens because they could not afford to buy grain to feed the chickens. So the kids would be just going out, and they probably had a great deal of fun doing this. Much more fun than sitting around playing on video games. And you grab grasshoppers and whatever, and put them in a bag, and then bring them home and feed the chickens. That's this sounds like, oh my gosh, what kind of skill is that? I mean, I saw a video that showed kids in I think it was Venezuela, out in the remote areas of Venezuela. And they would go out and find these giant bird spiders, and they would take them and catch them, and then they knew how to prepare them and roast them for food. Now, this wasn't that they were starving; it was just that they felt that eating these spiders tasted pretty good. I've heard they taste like peanuts, but I've never eaten spider before. I've eaten scorpion; they taste like potato chips, but the point is not to sell you on the idea of eating spiders, but the point is we don't have those skills anymore. We seriously don't have those skills. And if, we need to kind of get back on those things. So teach your kids how to plant things. Teach them lessons. Heck, you could teach them a Bible lesson with the seeds, but teach them what's required for growing materials, because we never know when we might need to go back to those days where you needed to produce food yourself. And you didn't have a grocery store. It was open 24 hours. You could just go get what you wanted. These are skills that people need to learn. And if they don't, it could mean the difference between surviving and not surviving. So, do it for yourself. Do it for the diversity of nature. Do it for your kids. Do it for the future. But, start cultivating and spreading these kinds of plants out there so that we do have an ability to be able to have a much more secure future, and one in which we're not completely dependent on giant agricultural industries in order to survive. Anyway, that's all the time we have. So take care, and hope to see you back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Take care now.